This lecture is about revolutions in design, part 1. Berlin, France, Italy, and the United States were not the only countries in which avant-garde art movements had a major influence on graphic design in the period after World War I. Two major developments, de style and Russian constructivism, had a very long-lasting impact. Out of the conflict of World War I arose a new trend that established a visual language which would come to dominate the graphic design field for decades to come. The post-war de style movement in the Netherlands embraced a sense of order that was mainly a response to the horror of the First World War. De style means the style. The sense of impersonal universal principles conveyed by their uninteresting name was a very important part of their ideology. De style was founded by a group of artists and architects that included Theo van Doesburg, Piet Mondrian, Bart van der Lek, and Gerrit Rietveld. De style mixed admiration for the modern machine world with an avoidance of all forms of indulgence. The artists felt that unchecked individualism as well as nationalist egotism was responsible for the savagery that became the war. They offered a universal language of geometric abstraction as sort of a solution for Europe's wounded psyche. In their mind, reductive geometric abstraction could not be identified with any one country, which was really the most universal and suitable style for the new post-war era. The de style artists shared with the purists and others a strong Neoplatonist bias, an abstract ideal of universal harmony. De style features a strong utopian theme. Its members purified art of representation and emotion in order to effect broad social change. However, as with the French purist movement, it became evident that they could not embrace universalism fully while still shedding their national identity. Piet Mondrian used the term neoplasticism to refer to his aesthetic, and he really rejected all of the decorative excesses of pre-war art. He also rejected the emotionally laden complexity of expressionism. So it supported more of a radical type of simplification, even than that of the Cubist artists. This is his piece Tableau 2, which is non-objective. It doesn't represent anything from the natural world. For Mondrian, this painting demonstrates a series of balanced forms suggesting the harmony of the universe. He has limited his use of formal elements to straight lines, orthogonal compositions, and a strict palette of primary colors along with white, black, and gray. This series of images shows that de style did have roots in analytic cubist faceting, as the image of the cow passes through a cubist phase before it is further simplified. Through the process of simplification and gradual introduction of geometric structure, he transforms a drawing of a cow into a total abstraction. This really indicates how de style artists felt natural forms contain the essence of universal harmony. De style was created as a universal design style that was not to be limited to the fine art world. It was to unify all types of visual culture under one set of harmonious principles: architecture, furniture design, fine art. And it wasn't really simply an art movement, but it was made up of a group of people who wanted to act as agents of social change. Of all the post-war avant-garde movements, de style had one of the most immediate impacts on graphic design and typography in Europe. In October 1917, the year before the war was over, Van Doesburg began publishing a journal called De Style. It served as a visual example of the group's aesthetic principles in the world of graphic design and typography. During its first 3 years, Van Doesburg published 36 issues of De Style, featuring a series of articles about the movement's philosophy and aesthetics, and most of them were written in Dutch. You can see here in his logotype, each letter is defined by its rectilinear and orthogonal elements. Van Doesburg said of his plans for the journal, "The magazine will only concern itself with the modern style. Typographically and aesthetically, it will be austere without any trappings." The magazine was for the most part nondescript from the standpoint of graphic design. In 1919, Van Doesburg completed an experimental alphabet in which the letters were determined by an underlying geometric scheme, the shape of a square box that had then been divided into 25 equal parts, 5 rows of 5. This investigation demonstrates how an imaginary grid underlines much of de Style's graphic design and typography. The grid was a fundamental underlying structure, serving both as representative of pure Neoplatonic forms and as a key graphic design element. And if you think about design today, usually what most designs start with is an underlying grid that people really don't ever see. Hussar's design on the cover shows how simple geometric elements can create expressive tension when they are composed with a sense of contrast. So Hussar was the one that did the woodcut. Van Doesburg did the logotype. They created drama between solid and void. De Style designers pioneered the positive use of negative space that was destined to become a key component of the new typography, which we will talk about in Chapter 6. For the artist of De Style, the aesthetic principles of contrast, visible in terms of composition as well as color, was suggestive of the elemental forces of the universe. De Style artists believed that they could express universal truths through the use of contrasting elements. In early 1921, Van Doesburg, along with Mondrian, completely redesigned the journal as part of a new effort to appeal to a broader European audience. Articles were published in more widely used languages, especially French. It was really primarily a mouthpiece for Van Doesburg, who traveled much more than Mondrian. So, one of the things that's different about this cover from the original cover of the magazine is that the new design for the cover featured the title De Style, printed in black on top of red letters. The most noticeable break with the earlier design resides in the asymmetry of the composition. There's a broad blank space in the center of the cover, which for De Style artists did not represent absence of design, but was an active element that was balanced with the filled-in parts of the composition. The use of color as a structural element of design was another important contribution of De Style to modern design. In this example, Mondrian and Van Doesburg were limited to red and black and were able to get the most out of the inexpensive palette through careful juxtapositions. This is also representative of the De Style avant-garde letterpress printing, the use of standard types, ornaments, and rules in new dramatic compositions. This is a book by Ella Sitsky called Of Two Squares. This shows sort of a new phase of De Style, which prospered under Van Doesburg's guidance. He was really open to new emerging artistic trends. He published the poem Of Two Squares by Lissitzky, whose design showcases an experiment in the same reductive abstract language used by the artists of De Style. But he demonstrated a much more sophisticated use of existing type, making a dynamic composition. Lissitzky was actually, his art was informed by both the Suprematist and Russian constructivist movements. You can see here that he does not limit himself to horizontal and vertical axes, but includes asymmetrical and diagonal elements as well. Oblique designs such as Lissitzky's were eventually adopted by Van Doesburg in 1924 when he made a series of paintings in which the familiar rectangular blocks have been turned to 45 degrees. He called these new, more dynamic forms contracompositions and said that they increased the vitality of the composition while still maintaining the rigorous geometry of De Style. Mondrian really disagreed with this strategy and felt that the diagonal compositions introduced an element of personal expression which violated the universal ideas of De Style principles. This really led to the breakup of De Style as a unified group. The exploration of architectonic form was at the heart of the De Style enterprise. It came about because of the abstract geometry that underlines most architectural projects, but was mainly based on the fact that it represented the most complete opportunity for an artist to synthesize many arts into a unitary whole, bringing us back to this idea of Gesamtkunstwerk. Van Doesburg was interested in color in architecture when he began a series of studies that demonstrated how color contrast could be used in building design. This is a house called the Schroeder House by Gerrit Rietveld. For the most part, Van Doesburg's architecture remained speculative, but Gerrit Rietveld was the first commission to make the neoplastic style into an architectural reality. The Schroeder House shows the potential of de style to serve as the basis for a dynamic new architecture. The extravagant stylization of his work can be compared to the illegibility of Van Doesburg's original de style logotype. Which brings us to poster design. Graphic designer Bart Vanderlecht's commercial work and painting were an integral part of de style. He really grew tired of the rigid principles of Mondrian and Van Doesburg, and really, in contrast to Art Nouveau, overt de style works never really made the transition that had made the former style an accepted part of the graphic design industry. To produce this design, Vanderlecht passed through a series of 12 graduated images, each one showing more of a transformation from illustration to geometric abstraction. He began with a drawing that showed strong black outlines and sequentially removed them and filled the empty spaces with primary colors. In the final, the figures were reduced to a series of geometric shapes, including squares, triangles, and trapezoids. Unfortunately, this design was rejected by the Salad Oil Company and was never reproduced. While it may seem that de style and Dada artists would have very little in common, there were some interesting collaborations in the 1920s involving members of the two groups. Van Doesburg organized the Constructivist Congress in Weimar, Germany, and invited Tristan Tzara, Kurt Schwitters, and Jean Arp in order to explore possible synergistic connections between Dada and constructivist principles. A number of the participants were initially scandalized by the arrival of the Dada artists, but Van Doesburg was able to negotiate peace between them. This is a picture of the Constructivist Congress in Weimar. In 1918, Dada lost its original goal to protest against World War I and became more invested in pursuing art and design professionally. Dada, as practiced by Schwitters and Van Doesburg in 1922, had transformed into a recognizable set of aesthetic principles. Dada ideas of unrestrained creativity and artistic rule-breaking was broadly infused into avant-garde art. Both groups also shared a disdain for past tradition, the quote-unquote old forms that lacked creative spirit and were representative of the authorities that led Europe into war. In several issues of its publication, Merz, Schwitters developed a unique hybrid style that successfully reconciled Dada rule-breaking with the geometric abstraction favored by de style and the Russian constructivists. This is a really good example of that. So this is a poster advertising Van Doesburg and Schwitters' performances as they traveled around the Netherlands promoting Dada Merz evenings. It displays recognizable Dada elements of chaos, and it is hard to imagine the promoter of the new harmony taking part in such a disharmonious endeavor. Despite the sense of community shown by the Weimar Congress, Van Doesburg used a pseudonym I.K. Bonset when he was working in the Dada style. To a Dutch speaker, sounds like I'm crazy. Van Doesburg, or Bonset, briefly published a journal devoted to his Dada work. It featured a sort of topsy-turvy Dada designs that were featured in similar publications. The title Mécano means mechanic in French and is suggestive of the manner in which he injected the archetype of the machine into his Dada work. This cover is a hybrid of de style type orthogonal structure and a whimsical use of the letters rotated onto different axes.